From the moment Maya Jefferson stepped inside the courthouse, the weight of unspoken judgment pressed against her like a suffocating fog. Whispers rippled through the gallery, feeding off prejudice and speculation. She had seen it before, the subtle slights, the veiled condescension. But today was different. The hostility was raw, undisguised. At the plaintiff's table, two uniformed officers sat with smug confidence, exchanging knowing glances. Across the room, the judge, a man with a reputation for siding with law enforcement, cleared his throat. Maya remained composed, her expression unreadable. She had come prepared, armed with more than just legal expertise. She carried the truth. But she wasn't going to reveal her hand just yet. She wanted to see exactly how far they would take this charade. That morning had started like any other. She rose before dawn in her modest Brooklyn apartment, the hum of early traffic filtering through her window. A routine cup of coffee, a brisk walk to clear her mind, then a train ride into Manhattan's legal district. Her schedule was full. Motions to file, briefs to review, cases to analyze. The weight of responsibility never felt like a burden, it was a privilege. She had spent years fighting for the overlooked, those caught in the crosshairs of a system designed to work against them. But today, instead of taking the subway, Maya had decided to drive. A last-minute call about a legal matter in Queens required her flexibility. She navigated the morning rush hour with practiced ease, the soft melody of R&B playing in the background. For a brief moment she felt at peace, lost in the rhythm of the city she had always called home. Then, the sirens came. Flashing red and blue lights cut through her rearview mirror. A police cruiser tailed her, its presence undeniable. Her stomach tensed, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had done nothing wrong. Yet, experience had taught her that innocence wasn't always a shield. She pulled over, fingers steady as she lowered the window. The two officers approached with an air of manufactured authority. The taller one, Officer Troy Miller, had a mustache that drooped lifelessly over thin lips. His partner, Officer Kevin Rohr, was heavier, his face flushed, as if permanently irritated. Maya greeted them politely, her voice steady. "Good morning, officers. How can I help you?" Miller barely looked at her as he demanded her license, registration, and proof of insurance. His tone was clipped, almost disdainful. She complied without hesitation, handing over her documents. "What's the reason for the stop?" she asked, keeping her voice measured. Miller didn't answer right away. Instead, he flipped through her license, exchanging a glance with Rohr. Then, with a smirk, he said, "You were speeding. 45 in a 30. Mia's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. She knew she hadn't been speeding. The streets were crowded with pedestrians and cyclists. She had been extra cautious. Still, she knew better than to argue. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I believe I was under the limit." Rohr scoffed, leaning closer. "You calling us liars?" She exhaled slowly. "I'm just asking for clarity, officer." Miller took a step back, muttering something under his breath. Maya caught fragments of his words. Attitude. These people. Her jaw clenched. She had heard it before. The coded language, the barely concealed contempt. Then Miller's tone sharpened. "Step out of the car." Maya blinked. "Excuse me?" "We need to do a quick search," Rohr added, already reaching for the door handle. A slow, controlled breath left her lips. "May I ask why? Do you have probable cause?" Rohr's eyes darkened. "Are you resisting, ma'am?" And just like that, the air thickened. The tension coiled tight. A familiar sinking sensation settled in her chest. She knew where this was headed. Still, she complied, because she had nothing to hide, because she wanted to see just how far they would take this. Because they had no idea who they were dealing with. Maya stepped out of the car slowly, hands visible, every movement deliberate. She wasn't afraid, she was angry. But anger had to be controlled, refined into something useful. The last thing she needed was to give them an excuse to escalate further. Pedestrians on the sidewalk slowed, their curious glances shifting between Maya and the two officers. A few had their phones raised, recording. She wasn't alone in this moment. That mattered. Rohr wasted no time. He turned her around, hands firm as he patted her down, too rough, too eager. Maya forced herself to stay still, swallowing the violation burning through her veins. Behind her, Miller rummaged through her car, tossing aside her neatly stacked legal briefs like they were garbage. She clenched her jaw, watching the reflection in the car's side mirror. Every fiber of her being wanted to snap at him, demand respect, but she knew how these situations went. The moment a black person challenged authority, they were labeled aggressive. So, she bit her tongue, waiting. After a few long, excruciating minutes, Miller slammed the back door shut. "Nothing," he muttered to Raw. Raw stepped back, his smirk returning. "Guess you got lucky." Maya turned to face them fully. "Am I free to go now?" Miller's lips curled. "Not so fast." He pulled out his ticket book, flipping it open with exaggerated slowness. "Speeding violation, 45 in a 30, and for the trouble you gave us. Maybe resisting too." Maya's stomach dropped, but outwardly she remained unmoved. "Resisting?" she repeated. "I cooperated fully." Raw let out a low chuckle. "We'll see what the report says." And that was it. That was the play. It wasn't about a traffic stop. It never was. It was about control, about reminding people like her of their place. This was how the system worked. Manufactured infractions, falsified reports, subtle threats designed to erode any challenge to their authority. Maya took the ticket, her fingers curling around the paper like a steel trap. This wasn't over. She watched as the two officers strolled back to their cruiser, completely at ease. No hesitation, no concern that their actions would come back to haunt them, because in their world, they were untouchable. She stood there long after they drove away, the summons in her hand feeling heavier than it should. A few bystanders gave her sympathetic looks, but no one approached. That was the thing about injustice. People saw it, but most didn't want to get involved. Maya exhaled, slow and controlled. Her heart wasn't pounding from fear. It was burning with something sharper. She slid back into her car, placed the ticket on the passenger seat, and reached for her phone. The first call was to Marcus Reed, a fellow DOJ attorney. She kept her voice measured, factual, laying out exactly what had happened. Marcus listened without interruption. Then, after a pause, he asked, "Did they know who you were?" Marcus let out a low whistle. "They just picked a fight with the wrong person." Maya stared straight ahead, the city moving around her like an indifferent machine. "I want to see how far they take this," she murmured, "before I play my card." There was a beat of silence. Then Marcus said, "I'll start pulling files." She ended the call and rested her hands on the wheel. The anger was still there, simmering, but now it had direction. She would not let this slide. By the time she reached her apartment, she was already thinking ahead. The ticket wasn't just an inconvenience, it was evidence. Maya set her bag down, flipped open her laptop and began typing. Every detail, every word, every action taken by those officers. She logged the time, the location, the way Miller sneered when he mentioned these people. She saved the names of potential witnesses, cross-referenced local businesses that might have security cameras pointed at the street. This wasn't just about clearing her name. This was about exposing them. And if they wanted to push this case forward, she would be waiting. Maya barely slept. Her mind was too sharp, too focused. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Miller's smirk, Raw's mocking stare. She saw the way they had twisted the moment to fit their narrative, confident that no one would question them. By morning, she was done waiting. Dressed in a crisp navy suit, Maya gathered her documents, the ticket, her notes, and the USB drive containing the cell phone footage she had managed to track down. The video wasn't long, but it was enough. It showed her standing still, hands visible, as Raw shoved her against the car and Miller rifled through her belongings. No aggression, no resistance. She locked her apartment and headed straight to work. The Department of Justice building in Manhattan felt the same as always, formal, orderly, a place of rules and structure. But today, as Maya moved through security and into her office, she felt a shift in her own perception. She had spent years prosecuting criminals working within the system, but now the system had turned on her. Her phone buzzed. Marcus. "They filed the charges," he said without preamble. "Resisting arrest, obstruction, You're due in court next week." Maya gripped the edge of her desk, her knuckles whitening. They really did it. They did, and they have no idea what's coming. Maya exhaled, slow and measured. Then it's time to let them know. An hour later, she stepped into the law office of Stella Morano, a powerhouse attorney with a reputation for dismantling police misconduct cases. Stella was waiting, arms crossed, her sharp eyes scanning Maya as she approached. "I read the report," she said. "It's garbage." Maya sat across from her, setting down her documents. "It's calculated." Stella leaned back, considering her. "They have no idea who you are, do they?" Maya shook her head. "Not yet." A slow smile spread across Stella's face. "Then we play it their way, until the moment we don't." They spent the next hour dissecting the case. Stella drafted motions, mapped out arguments, and strategized how to dismantle the prosecution's claims. The plan was simple. Let them present their version. Let them believe they had control. Then, drop the bomb. As they wrapped up, Stella gave Maya a firm look. "You're calm now. But when you step into that courtroom, when you see them sitting there, don't let it shake you." Maya met her gaze. It won't. She had already decided. This wouldn't be a fight. It would be a reckoning. The courthouse was packed. Maya entered alongside Stella, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. She could feel the eyes on her, hear the murmurs spreading through the room. At the prosecution's table, Miller and Raw sat with smug certainty, their attorney, Caroline Whitaker, whispering to them like this was routine. Then there was Judge Alan Harrison, a man known for siding with law enforcement, his rulings rarely favoring defendants who challenged the police. He adjusted his glasses, barely sparing Maya a glance before addressing the room. People of the State of New York versus Maya Jefferson. Charges include resisting arrest and obstruction of governmental administration. Maya kept her expression neutral as Stella rose. "Your Honor, we plead not guilty and request to present evidence that contradicts the officer's claims." Whitaker smirked. "Your Honor, the defendant has no standing to challenge sworn testimony from law enforcement." Stella didn't blink. "We have video evidence." The judge's lips thinned. "Proceed." A screen was wheeled in, and the courtroom fell silent as the short clip played. Maya standing still. No raised voice, no aggression, no resistance. The moment it ended, the silence hung thick in the air. Stella turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the prosecution's case is built on fabrication. My client complied in full. The officer's report is false." Whitaker shifted uncomfortably. "A few seconds of video, hardly." Maya stood, calm, unshaken. And then, with the weight of the entire courtroom pressing in, she delivered the final blow. "Your Honor, there is additional context I'd like to provide," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. Judge Harrison glanced at her, indifferent. "And what context is that?" Mia straightened, looking directly at him. "I am an assistant U.S. attorney with the Department of Justice, Eastern District of New York." The room erupted. The shock rippled through the courtroom like a detonation. Whispers surged across the gallery. A low murmur hummed beneath the judge's gavel as he rapped for order, his expression faltering for the first time. At the prosecution's table, Miller and Raw stiffened, their confidence bleeding from their faces. They exchanged glances, silent, wide-eyed. The arrogance was gone. In its place, a creeping realization. Whitaker recovered first, though the stiffness in her posture betrayed her. "Your Honor," she began, her voice tight, "the defendant's employment status is irrelevant to the charges at hand." Maya didn't even look at her. She kept her focus on Judge Alan Harrison, whose fingers now gripped the bench a little tighter. She had seen this reaction before, the moment when the system, so used to treating black bodies as disposable, realized it had miscalculated. "With all due respect, Your Honor," Maya said, her voice steady, deliberate, "it's entirely relevant. These officers knew nothing about my background when they fabricated this report. They assumed I was just another target, someone they could control, intimidate, and silence. But I know the law. I uphold the law, and I know when it's being weaponized against me." A heavy silence fell over the room. Judge Harrison's jaw tightened. The weight of the situation pressed against him now. He wasn't just presiding over another case of alleged police misconduct. He was presiding over a federal attorney who had been railroaded by officers under oath. Miller shifted in his chair. Raw swallowed hard. The balance had shifted. Whitaker pushed forward, though her confidence had thinned. "Regardless of her position, Your Honor, we maintain that the officers acted within protocol." Stella didn't even wait for Harrison's response. She stepped in, voice sharp. "Protocol?" She turned toward Miller and Rohr, her gaze slicing through them. "So, it's protocol to fabricate charges, to file a false police report, to abuse your authority when you think no one will challenge you?" Judge Harrison exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. The pressure was building. This wasn't a simple case anymore. It was a political disaster waiting to explode. Stella pressed forward. "Your Honor, in light of the evidence and considering my client's credentials, I move to dismiss these charges immediately on the grounds of wrongful prosecution." Judge Harrison hesitated. His fingers tapped against the bench, a man weighing not just the law, but the optics. His gaze flicked to Whitaker, who for once had nothing to say. Maya didn't move. She didn't blink. She had seen power shift before, and this was it. Finally, Harrison exhaled. Motion granted. The courtroom erupted again. Miller's face drained of color. Rohr gripped the edge of the table, his hands white-knuckled. Whitaker looked like she had swallowed glass. But Maya? She stood tall, unmoved as the judge continued. "Charges against Maya Jefferson are hereby dismissed. Furthermore, given the discrepancies between the officer's report and the presented evidence, I am ordering an internal review into this matter." It was a death sentence in legal terms. Judge Harrison's way of washing his hands of the mess, but the impact was the same. The case against Maya was dead, and now the real scrutiny would begin on Miller and Rohr. Whitaker sat down, defeated. Miller and Rohr remained frozen, silent in the face of the fallout they never saw coming. Maya inhaled deeply. The war wasn't over, but this battle. She had won. Maya stepped out of the courthouse into the crisp New York air, the weight of the past week finally lifting. The dismissal was only the beginning, she knew that. But for now, the first battle was over. She was free. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, voices overlapping in a chaotic frenzy. She ignored them, walking with measured control. Stella was beside her, Marcus not far behind. The doors of the courthouse shut behind them, but inside, Miller and Rohr were still sitting there, processing the wreckage. They had lost. They just didn't know how much yet. The backlash came fast. By the time Maya returned to her office, her phone was blowing up. Emails from legal colleagues, messages from civil rights organizations, calls from people who had read the court transcripts. People were paying attention. And that was bad news for Miller and Rohr. Detective Brian Costello from Internal Affairs called within hours. "We're officially launching an investigation," he said, his tone clipped but serious. "I need to ask, are you willing to provide testimony?" Maya didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." The next morning, headlines tore through the city. Federal attorney targeted by NIPD officers. Charges dismissed. Investigation launched. Lemon Rohr. Officers with a pattern of complaints now under scrutiny. PAGI's possible federal civil rights case against NYPD precinct. It was exactly what Miller and Rohr had feared. Exposure. Meanwhile, the precinct was imploding. Miller and Rohr walked in like usual that morning, but nothing was usual anymore. Officers they once considered allies avoided their gaze. The captain's office door stayed shut longer than usual. Conversations stopped when they entered the locker room. They weren't untouchable anymore. When the police commissioner held a press conference later that evening, the final nail was hammered in. Effective immediately, officers Troy Miller and Kevin Rohr are suspended without pay, pending further investigation into allegations of misconduct. A public firing without the word firing. But everyone knew where this was headed. Maya sat in her apartment, tea in hand, watching the fallout unfold on the evening news. Her phone vibrated. Marcus. "They're done," he said, They just don't know it yet. She set the mug down, watching Miller and Ruhr's faces flash across the screen. The once confident officers now stripped of their badges, their reputations hanging by a thread. "They thought they could bury me," she murmured. "Now they're the ones sinking." Marcus chuckled. "Poetic, isn't it?" She exhaled, her fingers tightening around the phone. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person they had silenced, every life they had disrupted, every false charge they had written, knowing no one would question it. Until now, Maya wasn't just going to watch this unfold. She was going to make sure it never happened again. Maya didn't wait for the system to catch up. She moved first. The day after the suspensions, she met with Samira Green, a civil rights attorney who had been battling NYPD misconduct cases for years. Over black coffee and stacks of legal briefs, they strategized. "There are more," Samira said, sliding a folder across the table. "More complaints, more victims. Miller and Ruhr didn't just target you. They've been doing this for years." Maya flipped through the pages, her stomach twisting. Names, faces, people who never had the resources to fight back. She had won her battle, but the war? It was just getting started. Meanwhile, Miller and Ruhr were drowning. The suspension had been bad enough, but now? Now the DOJ was involved. A full-blown federal civil rights investigation was unfolding, and their names were at the center of it. Their union lawyer fought for them, but the evidence was stacking too high. Internal affairs, witness statements, the cell phone footage that exposed their lies. Then came the final blow, the perjury charges. Detective Costello had recommended prosecution. Filing a false police report wasn't just misconduct, it was a felony. Their world was crumbling. And Maya? She wasn't done yet. A month later, she stood on the steps of City Hall, microphones in her face, cameras rolling. The press conference wasn't just about her, it was about all the voices that had been ignored. "This was never about one case," Maya said. Voice steady, controlled. "It was about a system that protects bad actors and punishes the people who dare to question it." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "I was lucky. I had resources, I had connections. But how many others didn't? How many were silenced before they could tell their stories? That ends now." She wasn't just talking anymore. She was leading a movement. The verdict came 6 weeks later. Miller and Ruhr. Guilty. Fired. Barred from ever wearing a badge again. The civil rights investigation expanded beyond them, pulling the entire precinct under scrutiny. The DOJ issued reforms, the NYPD scrambled to clean house, and the officers who had once laughed at Maya in court, they weren't laughing anymore. Late that night, Maya sat on her apartment balcony, staring out at the city that had tried to break her. It hadn't. Her phone buzzed. "Marcus." "You did it," he said. Maya exhaled. "We did it." She wasn't naive. She knew this wasn't the end. There would always be another case, another name, another fight. But now, the rules had changed. Now, they knew who they were dealing with. And next time, they'd think twice. Because Maya Jefferson didn't just survive their system, she exposed it. Maya's story isn't just a legal battle. It's a blueprint for resilience, accountability, and systemic change. Every day, people face discrimination, abuse of power, and injustice, often without the resources or knowledge to fight back. But Maya's approach teaches us valuable lessons that we can apply in our own lives. Know your rights. Understanding the law is one of the most powerful tools against injustice. Whether it's during a police encounter, at work, or in daily interactions, knowledge prevents manipulation. Document everything. Evidence is the difference between being dismissed and being heard. Take notes, record interactions where legally allowed, and gather witnesses. Truth alone isn't always enough. It needs proof. Stay composed, stay strategic. Anger is valid, but control wins battles. Maya didn't react emotionally. She planned, gathered support, and struck at the right moment. Expose injustice, but build solutions. Fighting back isn't just about winning one case. It's about creating lasting change. Whether through advocacy, policy reform, or supporting those without a voice. The world won't change overnight, But standing firm, staying informed and demanding accountability makes sure it never stays the same.